So now to start our first presentation, I invite Lydia Tameli, that she's a policy expert on EU industrial decarbonization at Carbon Market Watch, and Camille Mori, that she's a senior officer in the climate and energy team at WWF European Policy Office. So the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Ijelene. I'll start, and thanks everyone for joining the session today. We're excited to share this report with you. We've been working on it for the past few months, and maybe in the first slides of our presentation, I can elaborate a bit on where we're coming from with this report. So in the past years, both our organization have been working on the topic we'll be sharing about today. So in 2022, WWF published a key report on the use of EU ETS auctioning revenues among member states, where they found that almost 100 billion euros were ended out for free to industry through free allowances, which is even more the amount that was actually auctioned during the same period, phase 3, 2013 to 2021. The year after, at Carbon Market Watch, we published our emission aristocracy, where we found that in 2022, 50% of all EU ETS revenues, or ETS emissions, were to be attributed to only 30 companies, only 1% of the companies under the ETS. And all the industrial players were receiving huge amounts in free allocation. So this year, we wanted to go one step further. And Camille, if you want to elaborate.
Yeah, thank you. So if we go to the next slide, and good morning also from my side. So indeed, this year we wanted to go one step further. So we really wanted to look at which sector pollute the most, but also are paying less. Which one are the ones that receive actually most of the share of free allocation in the year 2023. And we also went a bit deeper because for this year we looked into the Innovation Fund. We looked in the Innovation Fund for the year 2020 until the year 2022. And the idea was really to look at how much industries like heavy industry, steel, cement, chemicals are receiving also from the Innovation Fund for those 2 years. We also looked in the year 2023. It was a bit more difficult. Lydia will explain that in a bit because of the data that we found. But the idea was also to look into the clean industrial deal narrative and to explain that we know that now policymakers are really looking at putting a deal. Actually, the deal will be out tomorrow. It will be released by the European Commission. With this idea of focusing on both energy-intensive industry and also the clean tech sectors. So actually, we wanted really to focus on how much those heavy industry already received in the year 2023, and to make sure that if we have new investment coming in, they are now made conditional to certain criteria for those heavy industry. And now Lydia will explain the methodology.
Indeed. Yeah, we want to share the methodology we use as we're trying to be as transparent as possible as to how we gather those data. So there's 3 different data sets, basically, that we use, we compose and used. So we'll start from the company data level. As you know, company level data is not publicly available for the EU ETS. What we did, we built up from the data set we already used for last year's emissions aristocracy, and we use a combination of installation level data from the EU transaction log, coupled, thanks to a work of a researcher we collaborate with Orbis database to plot the ownership level. And we managed to go at the higher private ownership level for each company. Secondly, sectoral data, where we still used EU transaction log installation data, but aggregated at NACE level 3 and 4. We try to be as granular as possible in this research to really show how, in contrast, the data from the UTL to the NACE data to the emission level. Finally, the Innovation Fund data set was compiled in-house with public data available on the Commission's website from 2020 and to 2022. And as Camille already mentioned, the data for 2023 is partial, as many of the agreement have not been signed yet, but this is made very clear in the report itself, but also some of the data may change in the course of the next month. So let's maybe dig into the main findings.
Yeah, thank you. So if you go to the next slide, please. Here are the main findings of the report. So we try to actually summarize them into two parts. So top polluters. So if you go through the report, which was actually released today, you will find out that the main polluters are steel, cement, oil refining, and chemicals. That during actually the phase 4 of the ETS, which was revised in 2022, we still have actually a lot of allowances which are given for free, and this leads to actually some sector receiving more allowances than what they emit. This is particularly true also for some sectors, so like steel and cement, and especially for some company like ArcelorMittal. So if you look at the year that we focus on, 2023, this means that 40 billion euro were lost in free allowances instead of being actually invested in industrial decarbonization. When we looked at the Innovation Fund, the main findings are that the Innovation Fund, the way it is designed so far, actually finance a lot CCS and CCU technologies. That's mainly the technologies that is financed for the year 2022, 2022. The main sector that received most of the finding is the cement sector. This is due to the fact that the main technology that is financed is CCS and CCU. Also, we looked at what it will mean if we delay the implementation of the CBAM. And actually, it will mean that we have a lot of loss in terms of allowances going towards the Innovation Fund. So for the year 2026 to 2023, 2030, sorry, so 4 years, this will mean that we have like 20 billion, which is lost in foregone revenue, instead of going towards the Innovation Fund. And I think now we will go actually a bit more into the fundamentals.
Yeah, indeed. I'll try to give an overview of the first half of the report, where really we identify the top polluters and we really scope out the issue that we see with free allocation. I'm sure most of you are very well acquainted with the functioning of the ETS, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, I'll just go over very quick the fundamentals that we'll need to fully understand the issues that we're highlighting today. So the ETS, as you surely well known, is a cap and trade system where the main way for companies to acquire allowances is to buy them at the auctions organized by member states. However, many of the allowances get distributed to companies, to industrial companies for free. Specifically, they get distributed to sectors that are deemed at risk of carbon leakage, risk that haven't been really proven at the moment. It's more that the risk that institutions see of companies relocating their business out of Europe due to excessive burden posed by climate policies. Secondly, the EU concept of the EU ETS revenues, auctioning revenues, of course, grants a revenue mostly to member states. Member states gather 75% of the total revenues. 12% gets redirected to the modernization fund, EU-led fund necessary for certain member states to modernize and innovate their energy systems. Finally, only 5% for now goes to innovation fund, as we know, directed at funding innovative clean tech, zero carbon and low carbon technologies. And finally, really the new policy tool that ties this concept together is the carbon border adjustment mechanism that will kick in. Now we are sure of that in 2026, and it will allow the phase out of reallocation for the sectors that are covered. This will mean more allowances will be auctioned, and these allowances will feed into the innovation fund. I saw already quickly a question I'll answer, or the remaining 80%. This data is 2023 data. The 8% fed the RFF, from basically allowing to the EU to cover for COVID for COVID restrictions cost. But again, this data is 2023 only. Previous years, the split was similar, but it was redistributed more between the existing three funds. Then I'll dig into the findings of this first half. The first big, really noticeable thing that came out of the data set is nothing new. The industrial sector in Europe is really oligarchic in their structure. You can see I took CELE as an example, but really just have a handful of companies being responsible for the overwhelming majority of emissions. So there are just two companies covering a bit more than half of all the sectoral emissions for the steel sector. I really singled out an example here, as I think is quite telling. ArcelorMittal is a single top recipient of free allocation in Europe. The emissions in 2023 amounted to 33 million tons of CO2. This has to be compared with how much they received, 45 million free allowances they received in 2023, which is huge. Of course, there are certain things to consider. In the steel sector, certain companies received allowances for the energy that's produced through their waste gases, which is a percentage that can go to 10 to 15%. However, we're talking here about 136% of free allocation received by ArcelorMittal compared to their emissions. Most importantly, we've seen in the end of 2024, this company is now backtracking from its green steel plants by halting many green steel projects across Europe. In the next slides, we'll see that this example that I singled out is widespread. So it's not an issue of one company or one sectors. I'm taking here the three top polluters under the EU ETS: steel, cement, and chemicals. Oil refining is not here, as most oil refining companies are oil and gas companies. So clearly, the total amount of their emissions is also to be attributed to the production of energy and generation of electricity. But these are really the industrial companies that we're trying to single out. You can see in the steel sector, very apparent in the cement and the chemical sector as well. Lots of companies received more allowances for free than their actual emissions. This is true for almost all chemical companies we analyze, for almost all cement companies we analyze, and for some steel companies with a huge variation, as you can see in between companies. Some received way more, some received a bit less, but for all of them, one thing is true: the overwhelming majority of their pollution is not paid for. They get off the hook, and at the moment, they don't really seem to pay their due. And of course, this is set to change in the next year. We'll see in the next slide. I'll take the cement sector as an example. Clearly, now in this presentation, I'm not able to cover the entirety of the report, so I really invite you to read. There's a lot of data that we're not able to share in this very short presentation. But the cement sector, right, in 2023, they emitted 94 million tons of CO2. And in contrast, they received 97 million free allowances, effectively covering all of their free allocation. So you'll find in the report really the trajectory of their emissions versus free allowances from 2010. You can clearly see that with the start of phase 3 in 2013, the amount of total free allocation significantly reduced. But also, the sector has not effectively paid for their emissions to this day. And even if we know that the phase out will kick in starting next year, you will see from this graph forecasting the volumes of free allowances that the sector will receive up to 2030. Even in 2030, in 5 years' time, they will still be able to cover half of their emissions for free. And effectively, we'll still have 10 more years to go of free allowances for these sectors. So these volumes will, of course, the descending volumes will be able to phase out free allocation thanks to the CBAM, and maybe now Camille is able already to scope out how important it is for the CBAM to kick in effectively and swiftly for the Innovation Fund.
Yeah, Thanks, Lydia. So indeed, part of our work was also to look into the Innovation Fund. And what we found out is that CBAM implementation will be key in order to have a bigger budget for the Innovation Fund. So if you look at this graph, you see like the timeline that has been agreed by decision maker here in Brussels in 2022, when there was both the revision of the ETS and also the text agreed on the implementation of the CBAM. You see that with an implementation of the CBAM as it's supposed to be in 2026, and also like you see on the graph that basically the allowances, the number of allowances is actually bigger when it comes to the number of allowances that are going to go into the Innovation Fund because of the phase out of the allowances to the CBAM sectors. If we delay that by 2 years, you see that actually it's actually very slow in terms of the number of allowances that ETS sectors / CBAM sectors, the allowances that will be phased out for those CBAM sectors that are going to have like the CBAM factors, so what we call like the CBAM factor that is supposed to kick in 2026. So you see that actually we have really a divergence in terms of the number of allowances going into the Innovation Fund volumes. So if you delay by 2 years, that now some are calling for a delay of the CBAM implementation. The latest we heard it's by 1 year, but some were calling of 2 years delay. You see that we have 20 billion less, which is going to the Innovation Fund budget for the year 2026 to 2030. On the year 2030 alone, we actually see that this will cost the Innovation Fund 9 billion euros, actually. So that means that on that special year in 2030, we have 9 billions that will still go into free allowances instead of going into the final budget of the Innovation Fund. Actually, we find that very damaging because we know since also a long time, but also since the report of the Court of Auditors in 2020, that free allocation are actually slowing down industry transformation and industry decarbonization. So we are finding that very damaging that we will have like this amount of allowances still given to industry instead of being auctioned and going towards the Innovation Fund volumes. So if you go to the next slide, thank you. You see that in the report, we spent some time trying to explain that actually the Innovation Fund budget is depending on two main criteria. So a strong carbon price, and obviously is what we wish to see and what is forecasted is that ideally by 2030, we have a carbon price which is at least around 100 euro a ton of CO2. And also the fact that more allowances are directed towards the Innovation Fund. And this is highly dependent on the phase out of free allocation and especially on the phase out of free allocation for the CBAM sectors. If you look at these piles of coins, you see that basically we have a big budget which is now foreseen to be given to industry. So you have more than 226 billion, which is actually forecasted to be given to industry for the year 2021 to 2030. In comparison, the budget to the Innovation Fund is way smaller. It's about 45 billion. So it's what Carbon Market Watch and WWF have been working on for a long time, is trying to really push for auctioning of allowances compared to giving them for free to industry. If you look at the next slide, so this is like this summarize our main findings. So I'm going to spend some time here. So we looked at the year 2020 to 2022, and we found out that approximately the total budget of the Innovation Fund was about 6.4 billion. We digged into the projects because actually, as Lydia mentioned, it's all public data. So you have a Commission website where it summarizes the different projects which are granted for those years, so 2020, 2021, and 2022. You can go and you can click on the different project agreements, and you have access to the amount of money that the Commission gives through grants to those projects. So we did a bit of calculation and we found out that actually 2.5 billion of this total budget is going to CCS and CCU projects. In comparison, low carbon and renewable hydrogen projects are receiving 1 billion, 1 billion for the year 2020 to 2022. So actually, cement and lime sector alone, they receive about 2 billion euros from the Innovation Fund through grants, and they are also promised 500 million for the year 2023. The year 2023 was a bit more difficult to assess because, as Lydia mentioned, grant agreements are being signed right now in Q1 2025. But the year 2023 is very important because it's the biggest call for project that was announced by the Commission. 85 projects were selected, so we could look at the promise, basically, at the different projects that were awarded. But we could not see the final amount, basically, which was given for each project. We could only see for cement and lime sector because we digged a bit into it and we looked at also press release from the companies which were actually saying that they received money from the Innovation Fund for that year. So what we say is that to change that, we really need to change the scope of the Innovation Fund, that more of the total budget of the Innovation Fund should go towards technologies that also encourage savings in the use of materials. So we only not focus on CCS, but we also focus on other type of technologies and other ways of decarbonizing the EU industry. And before we go into the final findings from Lydia, I think Lydia will present the policy recommendation.
Yeah, I'll be very quick. Of course, we have some suggestions on what to do about this. Nothing different from our long-standing position, as Camille mentioned, but CMW and WWF has been campaigning on this issue for a while. And so our recommendation is really end-free allocation, not only for sectors that will be covered under a CBAM and for which we already have a set phase-out timeline, but for all sectors. We have seen that the system has not worked in delivering the necessary decrease in emissions that we were looking for to reach our climate goals and in the European Union. So we should think of other systems. In the meantime, as clearly we can't from one day to another end this system, we advise that free allowances, residual free allowances, only go to companies that can demonstrate improvements in energy efficiency and adopt decarbonization plans, as said in the latest ETS revision. So let's use the conditionalities that we already agreed upon to really tie these free allowances to results in terms of reduction of emissions. This also means the swift implementation of the CBAM. Clearly, we want to swiftly phase out free allocation. We need to implement the CBAM in the foreseen timeline, starting next year, and with at least the agreed CBAM factors, if not faster CBAM factors, and gradually expand the scope of the CBAM to more ETS sectors, starting very urgently with petrochemicals and all bulk chemicals, and to indirect emissions. At the same time, sorry, Islen, can you say, thank you. In the same time, the conditionality, the funding that some certain sectors will still receive, for example, in the form on indirect cost compensation when incurring high energy costs, or in the state aid that member states hand out to certain industrial sectors, should be tied to environmental and social criteria. It cannot be no strings attached, as it has been in most cases until now. Finally, fix the scope of the Innovation Fund. We see that the money that has been handed out and been awarded to many projects has really been most for only certain sectors and certain technologies, and we need to reward the technologies that allow us to directly reduce emissions with the most cost efficiency and with significant raw material savings. So we advise to introduce raw material savings as a mandatory criterion for project applying to the fund. And thank you so much for listening to our presentation, and we're looking forward to the Q&A.
Thank you a lot, Lydia and Camille. Now we are going to our next presentation. There will be the 3030 report with Lisa. She is a policy advisor, climate and energy at WWF Germany. So, Lisa, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Islan, for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here today and to present you the Dirty 30 report. We will have a look at the CO2 emissions now in the industry sector in Germany. I will start with that. And then I will give you a closer look on the Dirty 30, on the 30 dirtiest installations. And I will have a special close-up on the steel industry. And then later we move to the policy recommendations. So we already published the Dirty 30 report in 2023. And we looked at the numbers of 2021, of the years 2021 and 2022. But unfortunately, not so much has happened concerning the emission reductions in the industry sector. So the numbers are still very relevant. Yeah, that's why I'm also happy to present you this very important report to you today again. The analysis was conducted by the Öko Institute in Germany. This is a well-known research institute in Germany, and the data is also based on the EUTL, so based on the ETS data. Yeah, already mentioned the years 2021, 2022. And we looked also at the energy-intensive industry, so the steel industry, the cement industry, and the chemical industry. And now we can move to the next slide. Yeah, I would actually start with a graph from the energy sector. So when you look at the table with the red circle around it, there you can see the development of the emissions of the energy sector in Germany. So from 2010 until 2020. And there you can clearly see that the emissions are going down. So we can see a clear decrease of emissions in the energy sector. And this has two main reasons. The one reason is that we have a law in Germany to phase out coal, a coal exit law. It's implemented. And you can also see a clear uptake of renewable energy in the electricity sector. And this led to a decrease of the emissions in the energy sector. And when we look at the table further below, we see a blue graph, and this one represents the emissions of the industry sector from 2010 until 2022. And there you see that the graph is slowly moving a little bit up, a little bit down again. And this decreases are mainly due to, for example, to the economic crisis that happened in 2009, and the production levels decreased, as well as the amount of emissions. So that's why you see that it's going down a little bit again and then up again. And also after the Corona crisis, or during the Corona crisis, the production levels of industry were also decreasing. And that's why not so many emissions have been emitted in these years. But the big difference to the energy sector is that we do not see a structural emission reduction in the industry sector in Germany. And this is one of the main findings of this report. So all the emission reductions were the result of crisis-related production declines, but structural emission reductions were absent. And as soon as the economy will recover, we also expect that the emissions will rise again. So the German industry is not on track reaching its climate targets. Now we can move to the next slide. And now I can show you the results of the Dirty 30. So first, a few words on these pictures I would like to show you. So we see different icons. Actually, my colleague always says they look a little bit like little dinosaurs, but they should represent the installations of the steel industry, the cement industry, and the lime and the chemical industry. And the blue icons, the blue little dinosaurs, they represent the steel industry. The gray ones represent the cement industry, and the pink ones represent the chemical industry. And they are, you cannot see it very clearly here on the picture, but they are actually on a German map. So you kind of know where the different industry sectors and installations are located in Germany. And the bigger the icon, the more emissions were released on this from this specific installation. And where you see this little circle with the big installations from the steel industry, this is actually in the area of Duisburg, where we find a lot of steel industry in Germany, based on the also on the coal, because you could find a lot of coal there, and that's why a lot of steel industry has settled there. In total, when we sum up all the emissions of the dirty 30 installations, we come to a number of 58 million tons of CO2 emissions that were released in 2022. And this number is equivalent to 8% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in Germany. So this already shows that when we reduce the emissions of the 30 dirtiest plants in Germany, it will have a huge impact on the total number of greenhouse gas emissions in Germany. And in the next table, but we don't have to move to it yet. We do that in the next step. So one back again. Oh, yeah, that's right. So when we, so later I show you this table. And when we look at the different installations and the ranking of them, you find, or you will understand that the first 13 places will go to the iron and steel industry. And the largest emitter in the industrial sector is the blast furnace of ThyssenKrupp, which is in Duisburg. So this is also the biggest icon you find here on the map, with 7.9 million tons of CO2 emitted in 2022. And the second place is represented by the blast furnace of Hüttenberg Krupp-Mannesmann, which is also in Duisburg in Germany, with 4.2 million tons of CO2. And now we can move to the table I'd like to show you. So to the next slide. Yes, thank you. So here you can see very well the ranking of the 30 dirtiest installations. So the different columns represent, so number one starts with the installation with the highest amount of CO2 emissions emitted. And then you find the name of the company, the installation, the city where it is located, the activity in the ETS, and then the emissions that were emitted in 2021, in 2022, and then also in, and then we wanted also to show the difference between the emissions emitted in between 2021 and 2022, so the difference. So as I already mentioned, from place 1 until place 13, you find the steel industry. So these are all installations from the steel industry. And further below, you also find installations from the lime industry, the cement industry, and also the chemical industry. And yeah, as already mentioned, ThyssenKrupp in Duisburg is the biggest emitter with 7.9 million tons of CO2 in 2022. And what is quite interesting, when we also look at the chemical plants, so when we look at the second table, for example, on place 23 and 24, as well on 28 with the company BASF, they all have installations where they produce ammonia. And there we see actually quite high emission reductions. So for example, mine 30%, mine 30%, or mine 12% between the years 2021 and 2022. But the reason why we have an emission reduction here is not because they changed their dirty production methods with clean production methods, but they lower down their production levels because of the energy price crisis. But I really would like to state here, this is not because of because they exchanged their production methods or because of transformation measures. It's really because of lower production levels. Yeah, now we can move to the next slide. Thank you. Since we found out that the steel industry has such a big impact in our Dirty 30, we wanted to have a closer look on the steel industry. So that's why we also wanted to look at the integrated steelworks in Germany. And the integrated steelworks, so we looked at the, so we have, we looked at the 6 integrated steel mills, and they are basically, or they, so integrated steel mills are, so they produce so you can find the whole value chain of the steel production on there. So they have quite an impact on the steel making in Germany and on the emissions, because only the 6 integrated steel mills alone account for a total of 86% of emissions. And again, when we look at Duisburg, we find the 2 biggest steel mills. They emit over half of the CO2 emissions of all integrated steel mills. And the one at the ThyssenKrupp sites emitted 6.2 million tons of CO2, and the one at Hüttenwerke Krupp-Mannesmann, 7 million tons. So they have also a very big impact on the emissions of the steel industry. And when they would change their production methods, the emissions would really go down. And what I also wanted to say is that when we only look at the steel industry and compare it with the other subsectors of industry, we find out that the steel industry alone emits 51 million tons of CO2. So they have quite an impact. So the good thing is that we see some movement in the steel industry. I'm working in WWF Germany in the Berlin office, and we had an election campaign in the past months. We had elections on Sunday, and we had a lot of discussion also about the steel industry in the last months and in the last years, and it was also part of the discussions on the elections campaigns, not as much as we had wished, but it was a little bit there. And what was nice to see that there was a clear commitment from the steel industry for transformation. And we very much hope that this will also be the case for the next legislative term. Because there's still a lot to do, not only for the steel industry, but also for the chemical industry and the cement industry. And I would like to present you a few recommendations we have on the next slide. Basically, some homework to do for the next legislation. So as Lydia and Camille already mentioned in their report, we need the phase out of free allocation allowances in the EU ETS. We need the implementation of strong conditionalities in the ETS, so we need to keep that, but we also need that in all other subsidies that industry receives. We need the implementation of green public procurement, because this is very relevant and will be a strong push for the creation of green lead markets. We need carbon contracts for difference, so we already have them in Germany, but now we are very worried that the next legislation, so the next parties will not push for them anymore. So this is a very clear call for, please let us keep the carbon contracts for difference. And a lot has to do on circular economy. So we need a EU-wide resource protection law. We need binding quantitative reduction targets. And we need more investment in real sustainable technologies, such as solar, wind energy, green hydrogen, heat pumps. And carbon capture and storage should really only be a small part and should only be applied to the hard to abate sectors. And finally, tomorrow we are expecting the Clean Industrial Deal, but it can only be an add to the Green Deal, but it can never replace it. And that's how I would like to finish. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Really interesting presentation. Now we are going to the last presentation, that is the French 15 industrial sites with Aurélie Brunstein. She's a heavy industry advocacy officer at the Resource Action Climate. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Islane, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to give you a few words about the French industry decarbonization and about the 50 most carbon-intensive industrial sites. So you will see that it's quite a similar work compared to what was already done for Germany, as it was presented previously. So I will just give a few figures about the emission trends in France. What is the decarbonization policy framework that we have? What is the public support that is available for the industry? The few first steps of conditionality that we have in France, and finally end with quick words about social conditions on public support. So first of all, a few background information. So in 2023, 17.5% of French emission comes from the industry, and 71% of these emissions come from three sectors that we already covered in the previous presentation. It's heavy industry sectors, steel, chemicals, and building materials such as cement and lime. And as it's the case for Germany, in France, we also had a fall in the industrial emissions. They decreased by 7.8% between 2023 and 2022. And this is mainly due to lower production volumes in steel and cement sectors because of a slowdown in the construction and automotive sectors, and also because of the fierce competition from Chinese steel. Then on the next slide, we can see the trends of the emissions for the different sectors. So for chemicals, ferrous metals, non-metallic minerals such as cement and lime, and others products. And what we can observe is that emissions have halved since 1990. This is mainly due to energy efficiency improvements, metals recycling improvements, the decrease of nitrous oxide emissions from the chemical industry because of new regulations, stringent regulations on that gas, and finally, deindustrialization in France. But what we can also observe is that starting 2010, the emissions have stagnated, and they then have fallen since the COVID crisis and the multiple crises that we have encountered since 2020. Then on the next slide, we have the policy framework. So in France, it's based. The industrial policy is based on three pillars. The first one is the 50 sites plan. This consisted of the elaboration of decarbonization roadmaps between the government and those sites, and this ended with the signature of ecological transition contracts between those two parties. However, it's important to underline that these contracts are non-binding, so the companies are not forced. They don't have to respect their emissions decrease the trajectory. And in counterpart for this roadmap elaboration, the governments committed to support the industry decarbonization with an envelope of 5.6 billion euros between 2022 and 2030, mainly via calls for proposal under the France to 2030 plan. And then this 50 sites plan was then extended to 150 sites. The second pillar is the national carbon capture, use and storage strategy. It aims at coordinating the various stakeholders in the future carbon value chain, define responsibility regimes through the different stakeholders, explore storage capacities in France, and also make some storage agreements with Norway and Denmark to store carbon in the Northern Sea. And finally, the last pillar is a national strategy for low carbon hydrogen that is supposed to support for the development of the hydrogen electrolysis sector in France. But the latest version showed an opening to hydrogen imports since the electrolysis sector is struggling to develop itself in France. So we can see that this industrial policy is mainly based on public support and trying to build an infrastructure for carbon transportation and storage and hydrogen supply. However, it's not a real industrial plan. And it's based on incentives with public support, and it mostly relies on the European regulatory constraints, which is mainly the end of free allowances. Then on the next slide, you can see where are our 50 most carbon intensive sites. So we have 4 historical industrial regions in France in the east, along the Seine River in Normandy, in the north near Dunkirk, and in the southeast near Marseille. But you can also see that we have cement and lime plants that are dispatched all in the country, because this is historically due to the location of limestone quarries. And you can see the 2 big blue dots, which represent they both represent ArcelorMittal sites in Dunkirk and Fos-sur-Mer. And together, these 2 sites account for 25% of the French industry footprint. You can also see in the table the 10 most carbon intensive sites and their emission in thousands of tons, and also the evolution of their emissions from 2019. And we can see that the emissions of most of the sites have decreased, but as I said, it's mainly due to the economic situation. So for the moment, we are not confident about the fact that all the sites have begun their decarbonization plans, and we still have some plants that continue to increase their emissions with Yara and LAT nitrogen in the chemical industry. Then we can move to the next slide and have a few words about public support. So first of all, we have public support from the European Union with the EU ETS free allowances that was already detailed by Camille and Lydia. We also have innovation funds, and the conclusion is the same as the previous one on the presentation, is that in France, innovation funds is mainly dedicated to decarbonized cement and lime plants and for CCS or CCU projects. And finally, we have an indirect funding of the industry decarbonization, which is the Just Transition Fund, which is granted to 6 regions in France for a total amount of 711 million euros. And then we have the public support from the French state. So the main mechanism to help all companies in France is the research tax credit. Then we have subsidies plan. The first plan was France Relance, which stems from the European Recovery Plan. And with that plan, 1.2 billion euros were dedicated to the acceleration of the industry's transition. And then starting to 2022, we had France 2030 plan with 5.6 billion euros dedicated to the decarbonization of industry. This envelope should have been increased to 10 billion, as it was a promise from the president that if the 50 sites did the work of elaborating roadmap, there would be a doubling of the envelope. But that was before France's budgetary turbulence. So that hasn't been confirmed. And finally, we have direct state aids, the latest one being the 850 million euros grants for ArcelorMittal Green Steel project in Dunkirk, which is for the moment on hold. So when we see all these public supports dedicated to the industry and the fact that we are still not confident about the fact that the industry is on track for its decarbonization, we advocate for conditionality. And at the start of this year, now we have conditionality that will apply on the future calls of proposal for decarbonization. So the mechanism is that the public aid is granted over a 15 years period, and the annual amount paid to the industrial sites will depend on the past year's decarbonization performance and the carbon price. So that means that planned emissions that have not been cut will not be subsidized, and there will be an additional penalty if the emissions performance are really lower to what was expected. And also, it's important to know that any winning project that is based on fossil energy will receive the first payment only if the site disclose a plan to phase out of this energy. And this phase out has to be by 2030 for oil and coal, and by 2040 for fossil gas. And of course, if the project is stopped, the manufacturer will have to refund the amounts that they already received. So this is a first step that is already a win for us, but we can observe that it lacks a social component. And if we go on the next slide, we can see that in France, the minimum we can ask as a social condition is the respect of our Climate and Resilience Act. That states that for the industrial company, they have to share strategic anticipations on decarbonization issues within social dialogue spaces. That means that the company's management have to share in social dialogue spaces what is the impact of their decarbonization strategies on jobs and career. And for the moment, we observe that this obligation is poorly respected from the exchange we could have with unions, for example. So for us, the compliance with this law represents a minimum social condition for the distribution of public aid. However, we need to have a more ambitious social conditions. That's why we ask to extend to stringent conditions, such as the compliance with social and labor standards, the fact that the site will not relocate to third countries with lower standards, a responsible tax behavior, and limits on dividend payments and share buybacks to make sure that the company will invest in its activities and in its decarbonization. And thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Now we are going to our Q&A session. I just pause here, interrupt the sharing, then I can see you because I was blind this entire time. But it was amazing to hear you. So I'm passing now the floor to Anna, my colleague, that she'll be the one moderating the Q&A session. So you are open to ask questions now.
Thank you, Ghislaine. And thank you to all the speakers. I'm missing one, sorry. Okay, I think now we are all here. Thank you for all the participants too. We had already some questions in the chat, but we encourage you to raise your hand and ask directly to the speakers the questions if you feel comfortable. We open the floor now to anyone who wishes to ask their question or make a comment or anything you feel like to any of the speakers. We have about 10 to 15 minutes to do this, so this is your chance. And please don't be shy.
Hello, hi. Do I need to switch on my camera? I mean, I can do that. Okay, give me a second. Let me just switch on.
Abdulaziz?
Yes,
Okay, yes, go
Abdulaziz,
ahead.
yes.
Yeah.
So I'm the editor of an energy magazine that's based in the Middle East, specifically in Bahrain. It's called Oil and Gas News. And don't be taken aback by the name. It's Oil and Gas News, but thankfully we have introduced a lot of good features in the past 3-4 years now in the magazine, where we have we have turned it from a purely oil and gas to a discussion platform where we discuss a lot of things around decarbonization and sustainability, circular economy, even plastic pollution, environment. Everything is covered in the magazine now. Renewables, of course, and whatnot. My question, first of all, the speaker's amazing presentation. Thank you so much. Our region is catching up with all of these things. It is predominantly oil and gas, but there's a lot going on in sustainability as we speak. Of course, we have to speed up and accelerate our efforts. But then again, we are seeing some good efforts being put on the ground as far as that's concerned. My question, as I put in the chat, is when you speak about free allowances given to the companies, what do you think that the governments get in return, so that we could just understand the trade-offs? I mean, these are free allowances, at the face value, it is free allowances, but there must be something that governments get in return. It could be jobs, could be, I don't know, taxes, could be something. And maybe that is being put into some good use. I don't know, maybe not. So just to understand if it is in fact actually all free allowances, or some of it is going into innovation and carbon capture, or any of that to mitigate carbon emissions.
Thank you. I don't know who wants to start answering, Camille or Lydia, or...
I think I can start, and then, of course, feel free to jump in. Maybe just very quickly on how the fair allocation system works. Basically, the European Commission makes a list of the sector they're deemed at the risk of carbon leakage. So the risk I explained before, right, of relocation. Risk that we haven't seen materialize quite yet. So among these sectors, then we have certain benchmarks set for each product, basically identify the top performers. And so the top performers per products identified receive up to 100% of the emissions for free. Then, as of 2023, we now have this conditionality. So only the very worst performers can receive a malus, so a minus 20% in allocation, if they fail to comply with certain requirements. So the drafting of the decarbonization plans for the worst performing installations, and if they draft to comply with energy efficiency rules. But again, there's a very minor component of the total free allocation. So when you ask what is the trade-off? Well, one may say that we see no relocation. We haven't seen these relocations, right? However, we haven't even seen data of the risk of this actually happening. We're talking about very capital-intensive industry. So of course, relocation it will be a huge deal, and we really wonder how much this concept have been used as a sort of a way of the industry to obtain certain advantages, because in practical terms we haven't seen the returns in emission reductions that the ETS was set up for initially. So I'll make a very easy comparison with the energy sector. So the energy sector, as of 2013, pays for their emissions in full or almost in full. Clearly, the energy sector was also able to benefit from other policies. We know about the investments in renewable plants and whatnot. However, the energy sector has decarbonized. We are talking, I think, around 50% of their emissions compared to around 20% of heavy industry, of manufacturing in the same time frame. So it's a huge difference, and of course, with a huge variation between sectors. I think cement, we're talking 11%, or refining clearly is less than 10%, is inherently polluting. A bit more for the industry, almost 20% for them, for the steel industry. But so the problem that we see is there's no strings attached. And it's not only fair allocation. There's all the things. There's indirect cost compensation. There is state aid. And where are the results? Where are where is the emissions in reductions, and where are the other potential benefits that we could derive in terms of jobs, quality jobs? And of course, feel free, Camille, or anyone else.
No, thank you. I think you sum it very well. Now, I just wanted to say thank you for your interest and also for the feedback on our presentation. And if you want to know more also on all of this and the work that both of our organizations have been doing, feel free to write to us. I think we have like plenty of materials which also explain that. If you are writing something about that, we are of course happy to support and help. I will leave the floor to other questions also.
Thank you, Camille and Lydia. I believe Connor is next in line. So please, Connor, can you ask your question?
Hi guys, yeah, really interesting webinar. I've been looking at free allowances and at the chemical sector in particular, and INEOS I've been looking into, and some of the things they've been asking the Commission for, which seem to be kind of aligned with what you guys are saying. They want to continue free allowances basically, and it seems like the industry is quite keen to delay CBAM, which I found that figure really interesting. Was it 20? A delay of 2 years could lead to 20 billion pounds euros that wouldn't go into the innovation fund, which is a huge number. I was wondering, because I'd like to keep working on this story, and if there are other journalists out there that want to collaborate on looking at free allowances for chemical companies, please do get in touch. You could probably just get in touch with the organizers of this brilliant event. And my question was going to be about I haven't actually seen it, but the leaked CBAM document. I think it just a few days ago came out, and I just wondered what you guys thought about the leaked document. It seems to be some kind of a delay, reading from some comments. Again, I haven't seen it. I need to look at it. Exemption for small importers, but also tougher penalties, which sound good. Just wondering, if anyone's able to give me their opinion on the leaked document and how likely that is to be the real, the finished article, more kind of room for negotiation there might be.
Thank you, Connor. Who wants to answer? Maybe we should allow Lisa or Aurélie to, or not. I don't know. Or Lydia. Okay,
I don't want to jump in, sir. Of course, Aurélie, Lisa, please feel free. But I'll try to be as short as possible. Thanks, Connor, for the question. On the CBAM leak, this is tough in the sense that we need to see the final text it will be great to see an impact assessment, our working staff documents where you can see the data, because if we can trust what the Commission says, that the simplifications, so the exemptions for smaller importers still retains. I think they declare 99% of the emissions.
Yes.
And so that's great. If this allows the CBAM to really enter into force quickly and effectively, this is great. And also, by the way, this reflects the finding of this report, which is a handful of huge conglomerates pollute for everyone else. And then we have a plethora of smaller players, which produce a very minor part of the emissions. And secondly, I want to point this out. From what you've seen in the leaks, the delay wouldn't be substantial in the scope of the emissions covered. It's just a delay in the obligation to purchase allowances.
Okay.
So the surrendering dates will stay the same. 2026 emissions will need to be surrendered by mid-2027, as foreseen. It is just a delay in the obligation to purchase these allowances. I think it will start in February 2027. So this will maintain effectively the scope of the emissions covered exactly the same. Can we expect to see amendments asking for a delay in the Parliament? I'm afraid to say so, but this is why we need to be very strong in defending what we have.
Thank you, Lydia. Camille, do you want to jump in?
No, I think Lydia summarized it very well. Just welcoming the call also if journalists are again writing on this. I think it's a very important topic and we are all happy, the four of us, to provide materials. So feel free to reach out. And I think there is also a question in the chat, maybe more for Aurélie and Lisa.
Okay, let's just allow Eva to ask her question first because she raised her hand. Eva?
Yeah, hello, thank you. I'm Eva Schwab from Fianza. I hope you can hear me well. I have a lot of echo for some reason.
It's a bit of an echo.
Okay, maybe I can. Is it better here?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm from Fianza, the European Federation of organizations working with the homeless. And I wanted to ask a question about the fairness aspect. So we heard now during the session, and thank you again for the presentations. I think they were very interesting. About the amount of ETS1 revenues that can be accumulated. And I wanted to ask more about the revenue redistribution, and particularly about proposals that I heard about during the CBAM for the Social Climate Fund, and also the question of the modernization fund. So you talked about the innovation fund, which I think is mostly for industry to decarbonize, and the modernization fund would be mostly more for households, also to help them decarbonize and to ease the pressure of the upcoming ETS2. So yeah, I wanted to ask whether you can offer any insight on these questions.
Thank you, Eva. Who wants to jump in?
Okay, I'm happy to take this one and then leave also Aurélie and Lisa for the one then which is written. Yeah, no, thank you for the question, Eva. I'm not sure I understood everything, so please also yeah, we can follow up in case you need more. Indeed, we focused here on the Innovation Fund because that's basically what we looked at when we talk about industry. Modernization Fund is a bit more like focused on the 10 countries which are under a lower certain level of GDP, but it's still also focusing also on innovation for those countries, at least to catch up with the decarbonization. When it comes to the Social Climate Fund here at WWF, we have like a very strong view on how we should really push for having a social climate fund, which is bigger in order to also allow indeed households to cope with what's coming, the ETS2 implementation. And I think our Market Watch also share this view. So trying to have like very strong social safeguards when it comes to the ETS2 implementation. So for the social climate fund part. And when it comes to the amount of revenue going to the social climate fund, there is a part of it from the ETS1, if I'm not mistaken, which will also be going toward the social climate fund. But indeed, it's not as big as it's supposed to. And when you look back at the number that we put, which was 225 billion for the year 2021 to 2030, going in free allocation, you could, of course, take some of it to help to have a stronger social climate fund. But please, happy to follow up if you have any more questions as well.
Thank you, Camille. Let's change the scope a little bit. I don't know if Aurélie or Lisa can see the question in the chat about Germany and France. So, Aurélie, do you want to start?
Yes, I can start with the French scope. So in France, at Réseau Action Climat, we talk with unions, and the first step we have to do is to share a common vision with them, because for the moment there are a lot of different scenarios of each sector's transition, and we observe that some unions tend to support business as usual and fossil fuel based process because they want to preserve the jobs, So we also need to convince unions that the transition can be just, and that we need them to be in the talks and to spread their voice also, so that it's effectively a just transition. So that's the first step that we are trying to do, mainly in the steelmaking industry, because it's an industry that has to change, to deeply change, to phase out coal. So that means, and also because in France, for example, we only have one primary steel producer, which is ArcelorMittal, and this industrial player is being really vague around its decarbonization in France. So we need to do some alliances with the unions if we want to be heard.
Thank you. Lisa?
Yeah, I can also say a few words about that. Thank you for the question. So in the past, we have published a couple of papers together with trade unions and industry unions on climate protection in industry. And as Aurélie also mentioned, it's very important also in Germany to have these partners on board when it comes to the implementation of climate protection measures. And yeah, we will definitely foster this cooperation also in the future, especially now with the new government. So they are strong partners.
Thank you. I think we have one more question. Liv, do you want to?
Yeah, hi guys. Thank you so much for the presentation and also all the work you continuously do. It's really great. I just wanted to touch a little bit more, or whether you could elaborate a bit more on this carbon leakage argument. What kind of data you look into when assessing this line of argumentation into certain industries, because I studied at a business university, and this is a clear, even 4 years ago, argumentation line, and now I hear it even more in the EU Parliament. So how do you assess this? What data are you using? Because for me, also even in theory, in economic terms, it's hard to find evidence of this, actually. Thank you.
Thanks. Camille or Lydia, maybe?
Lydia, I feel like you're the main expert of carbon leakage right now.
I can start, but as usual, please feel free to jump in. Thanks for the question. This is really one of the bases of our argumentations, right? And we have the same problem. We struggle to find evidence, and really, when I say we don't see evidence, I mainly refer to the impact assessments and to the data provided by the Commission. Normally, Commission legislative proposal is accompanied by the data proving that those measures that are being proposed are, proportional, are necessary, and all these requirements. However, for carbon leakage, this has always been taken as an assumption or something that may happen, but hasn't happened quite yet, which is problematic. We have, again, foregone billions, really, for industry to avoid this risk. Also, to clarify, carbon leakage is not simple relocation. Carbon leakage is relocation, which causes these emissions to also be relocated. So we see these emissions not in Europe anymore, but we see them increasing elsewhere. So it's not, it is a very specific concept. And sure, if you check emissions data, you can clearly see that they go down with the production. So we have an issue that we know of. We have had inflation, high energy prices, maybe to some extent a collapse in demand, which has led to issues in production and decreased production. Is this carbon leakage? No, we have had other issues, but these were not caused by industry having to pay a carbon price. They have not paid for a carbon price. They may have, some of them will have to in a few years, in 10 years, if you will. Some of them, we still don't have a phase-out timeline. We can say that the issues with productions that we see today are carbon leakage. Because all the measures in place to prevent it, even if we haven't seen it happen. And even the CBAM, you see, is a carbon leakage measure. So, again, lots of efforts, lot of policies, lot of protection for something that we have yet to be proven.
Camille?
Yeah,
I would
maybe
also like to add.
okay.
Sorry,
But
Lisa.
you can go first.
Yeah, just very quickly, just to complement what Lydia mentioned, and then I leave you the floor, Lydia. It was more so that what we see is actually investment leakage. And that's part of what's going on right now with the fact that also industry don't feel the carbon price. I think it has been quite clear also from the Draghi reports on the state of the competitiveness that there is an investment leakage. The European Investment Bank also mentioned that there is a huge investment, let's say, leakage. There is no investment right now going on, and that's where actually we should put the emphasis on. It's not carbon leakage, it's rather investment leakage that we see. And then Lisa, feel free to go.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that so carbon leakage is always used as such a broad term, but I think it always has to be evaluated so for each case. You can't say this is the reason why companies leave because of the CO2 price. It's a very individual decision of the company itself. And the term as such, so we haven't seen it in the past. And also in Germany in the past years, the word deindustrialization was used by industry so much. So Germany is going to deindustrialize. And but we are not seeing it. So there are definitely issues with the production levels that they decrease, and this has different reasons, but it doesn't mean that they're all leaving the countries and suddenly we have no industry anymore. So it really has to be carefully evaluated. What is the decision of a company to close a plant or to really move the whole production process to a different country?
Thank you, Lisa. Greg, you will be the last one to ask a question. So can you just be quick, please, because we are running out of time. Sorry.
But, sure, I will be quick, and that's good because I'm preparing our clean industrial deal reaction. So my name is Greg from Climate Action Network Europe. So thanks for dropping on this on me, Camille and Lydia. Brilliant report, and also the other ones. I think it's should feed into our communication. And on that, I just have a concrete question: the 136% number. If you can elaborate on how that's even possible, because I think that's in terms of communication and politically is something that we can use. So if they receive more free allocations than they emit, how does that work? And secondly, on the broader governance, you were talking about there's some specific criteria determining the amount of free allocation. How does that work? Maybe very short, but mostly how can we use this 130% number also, I think, politically, because I think if you want to push for more conditionalities, I think this is also a very good case to highlight tomorrow when the clean industrial deal goes live. I hope that was short enough.
Yes, thanks. Perfect, Greg. Lydia or Camille or someone else?
Very shortly on how the system works. So basically, we have the benchmarks, right? And we need to include in the calculation also the historical activity. So this is very important, and this is mostly why we see this over allocation. We have the historical activity, but if there's a sudden drop in 1 year of the allocation, in the production, you see a drop in the emission, but the free allocation remained the same. This is what happened very importantly during COVID. So you have a drop in production, so a drop in emissions for basically all sectors, but the free allocation remained the same. And right after, most industrial sector lobbied partially with success that then we needed to change the calculation of this historical activity level, so they basically could continue the same amount of free allocation. So they produced less, they emitted less, they received the same amount, but now they will still receive the same amount, even if we saw that drop in production, right? So this is a huge issue. And of course, the known issues with how we calculate the benchmarks. At the moment, many benchmarks do not reward technologies that are effectively less polluting because they reward the most polluting component of a product. I'm thinking of cement. Clinker is rewarded. So that's the most polluting component of cement instead of cement as a product, allowing us to benefit as types of cement that are less polluting. This is an example, but this is true for many benchmarks. And the 130 numbers, so the calculation is really simple, actually, as I described before. This is basically about aggregating all the accounts under the EU ETL, EU transaction log, and then through Orbis, aggregating them to the owner, the highest possible private owner. And what we know for ArcelorMittal, of course, it's spread all over Europe, but it's 136 number. We will need to investigate what happened exactly in each installation, because it's huge, and this proportion cannot only be justified by the waste gases. As I said before, waste gases from steel industry produce energy, and this basically the fair allocation of this energy is received by ArcelorMittal, but this can only explain one portion of this. This is way too much, and so I think to pick up on what Connor earlier said, this is also a matter for investigative journalists to jump in, I feel, because we know that what happened with Ilva, for example, in Italy, and what happened, there have been investigation on willful profits for certain installation, and I think this will be worth investigating.
Thank you, Lydia. I'm so sorry, everyone, but I need to be strict here because we have 1 minute to finish this as planned. So thank you so much, everyone, for all your interest. Please feel free to contact any of us with your questions or comments or requests. So I'm passing the floor to my colleague Islan to wrap this up. Thanks.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, all the speakers and all the participants in the session. Just to have a really fast wrap up of the session, we need to make the polluting industries, they pay for the emissions. That is a really big message for this session. And ensure that the financial support for industrial decarbonization is conditional on real, verifiable emission reductions. From the Life Effect project, which aims to ensure effective and fair European carbon trading by guaranteeing that the EU carbon pricing and the use of its revenues really serves both climate and the society. To the insights shared in today's presentations, we've seen that the current system is still have this imbalance that benefits high polluting industries, like we saw in the case of steel, cement, and chemicals. But we have the opportunity to do better, and we need to do it now as soon as possible. It's clear that the EU ETS needs to ensure that it serves the truly fair mechanism for both the planet and the people. We hope that today's discussion was really interesting for all of you. Thank you again for the speakers. And we have like future ETS talks. I hope that you can participate in the next ones. Because this project is basically focused more on the ETS2, that is the one that includes transport, road transport, and also buildings. So this new emission trade that we have, also the Social Climate Fund and the 2040 climate target as part of our Life Effect project. So we kindly also ask all the participants still in the room to have this link here that I share in the chat to answer later. Also, we are sending everything with the materials. So we would like to have to make sure that the next ETS talk, they are really bringing important information for all of you. And again, thank you for everything, for all the questions, for your contributions, and again, for the speakers and the organizations involved in this ETS talk. Thank you very much. Hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.